Angel Reese says WNBA players could go on strike over salary and benefits.
Career you choose, you should probably look at what the career earnings are of going into that field. What I'll also say is this: every single one of you WNBA players, you better pray that Caitlin Clark doesn't get injured, because she's keeping your league afloat.
Part of what made his comments stand out is that he isn't a beat reporter, sideline analyst, or credential-dependent insider. Traditional sports journalists often operate within systems that require maintaining access to teams, executives, and players. That dynamic can shape how strongly they phrase criticism or how cautiously they approach controversial topics. Bet David, however, operates outside that structure. As a businessman and media personality, he answers only to his audience, not to league offices or press credential departments. That independence changes how viewers interpret his statements. Because he doesn't rely on locker room interviews or league-issued access, he can speak with a bluntness that insiders sometimes avoid. He framed his critique as straightforward analysis rather than hot-take theatrics. To his supporters, that made his perspective feel more authentic, as though it came from observation rather than obligation. To his detractors, it made his remarks seem overly simplistic, lacking the nuance that comes from daily reporting within the sport. Either way, the difference in background meant his words were judged by a different standard than those of traditional commentators. Another reason his commentary resonated is that business-minded observers often evaluate sports through a financial lens. Instead of focusing solely on statistics or highlights, they look at revenue growth, ratings trends, sponsorship value, and negotiation leverage. From that perspective, the central question isn't just who plays well, but who moves numbers. When he argued that one player is the primary driver of the league's current bargaining strength, he was essentially applying a market impact framework to a sports debate. That analytical style can feel refreshing to viewers tired of rehearsed panel discussions. It can also feel provocative, because business logic sometimes reduces complex team dynamics to measurable outputs. Critics argue that sports ecosystems are never powered by a single individual, they're shaped by collective talent, historical momentum, marketing strategy, and cultural timing. Supporters counter that certain rare stars do shift entire leagues, pointing to historical examples where one athlete's arrival coincided with dramatic growth. His delivery amplified the reaction. He didn't hedge his statements or soften them with disclaimers. He spoke as if the conclusion was self-evident, which naturally invites strong agreement from some and strong pushback from others. That polarization is part of why the clip spread so quickly. Decisive opinions travel faster online than cautious ones. Ultimately, his background as an entrepreneur rather than a traditional journalist shaped how audiences interpreted everything he said. Viewers weren't just reacting to the argument itself, they were reacting to the fact that it came from someone outside the usual sports media ecosystem. That outsider perspective gave the segment a different kind of impact, one that sparked conversation precisely because it didn't sound like the typical broadcast debate.
What I love watching? I love watching her highlights of missing shots. She's got to be the worst shooter you've met in your life. But go, Rob, just go, give this feedback. Give this feedback here. Go for it.
What began as a single segment of commentary has grown into a wider conversation about influence, credit, and the evolving economics of professional basketball. At its core, the debate isn't really about one remark or one livestream. It's about how leagues grow and who gets recognized for that growth. His statement struck a nerve because they touched on a question that doesn't have an easy answer. Can one athlete truly transform an entire league's financial trajectory, or is success always the result of collective momentum? Supporters of his view argue that history shows examples of transformative stars whose presence coincided with surges in ratings, attendance, and sponsorship revenue. They see Clark as fitting that pattern and believe her drawing power has accelerated the league's expansion timeline. From that perspective, acknowledging her impact isn't diminishing others, it's recognizing a catalyst effect that sometimes occurs in sports. Critics, however, say that framing oversimplifies reality. They point out that leagues invest for years in marketing, youth development, media partnerships, and talent pipelines before any breakout star arrives. In their eyes, growth is cumulative, not instantaneous. They argue that focusing too heavily on one player risks overlooking the contributions of veterans, rising prospects, coaches, and executives who all help build the product fans watch. The intensity of the reaction shows how invested audiences have become in the league's trajectory. Fans aren't just debating statistics, they're debating narratives about leadership and value. That level of engagement is actually a sign of progress. Heated discussions usually happen when a sport reaches a point where more people are paying attention, analyzing details, and forming strong opinions. Another layer to the conversation is the role of media voices like Bet David. Independent commentators can shape narratives quickly because they're not bound by traditional editorial structures. When they make bold claims, those claims can spread rapidly and influence public perception. That influence doesn't determine outcomes, but it can affect how situations are viewed. In the end, the controversy highlights a turning point moment. The league is attracting unprecedented attention, its players are gaining larger platforms, and discussions about influence and leverage are becoming mainstream topics. Disagreements about credit are almost inevitable in that environment. But those disagreements also signal that the sport has reached a level where its future direction truly matters to people. And that may be the biggest takeaway of all. The fact that one commentary clip could spark such a widespread debate shows just how much the spotlight has grown. Whether people agreed with him or not, they listened. And in modern sports culture, attention itself is often the clearest sign that something significant is happening.
Reese has been vocal about her low WNBA salary, revealing her $74,000 a year salary doesn't cover rent, stating on Instagram Live, "I just hope you know that the WNBA doesn't pay my bills at all. I don't even think they pay one of my bills." Reese's financial struggles stem from WNBA salary not matching her past earnings, as her NIL valuation at LSU was $1.8 million, bolstered by deals with Reebok, PlayStation, McDonald's, and Coach, while a 4-year rookie deal was $324,000 with $74,000 due next season.
When Patrick Bet-David turned on his camera and addressed Angel Reese directly, it wasn't framed like a casual opinion or a mild sports take. It came off as a sharp, calculated critique delivered with the confidence of someone used to analyzing power structures and influence. He didn't speak in vague generalities, and he didn't hide behind anonymous commentary. He called her out by name, contrasted her stance with that of Caitlin Clark, and argued that Clark is the central reason the WNBA currently holds leverage in its ongoing collective bargaining negotiations. That claim alone was enough to ignite discussion across sports media and fan communities, because it touched on a sensitive question: who actually drives the league's recent surge in attention and bargaining power? According to his commentary, many fans have quietly been thinking similar thoughts but rarely hear them expressed so bluntly on mainstream platforms. His tone suggested he believed he was saying what others were unwilling to state publicly. Timing played a major role in how his remarks landed. The conversation unfolded while Reese appeared on live television discussing the possibility of sitting out the 2026 season, a statement that immediately triggered debate about player leverage, union strategy, and public perception. At nearly the same moment, Clark was making her debut as a guest analyst on NBA on NBC, speaking calmly about negotiations and expressing confidence that an agreement would ultimately be reached. That contrast became the centerpiece of his argument. On one side, he portrayed Reese's comments as confrontational and risky. On the other, he framed Clark's demeanor as measured and reassuring. Whether viewers agreed or disagreed, the comparison was compelling enough to spread rapidly online. Clips circulated, reactions poured in, and the discussion expanded beyond sports into broader conversations about leadership style, public messaging, and influence. He didn't present his statements as speculation. He spoke as though the conclusion was obvious, that the league's current position of strength is tied directly to Clark's drawing power and visibility. That certainty gave his remarks an air of finality, as if he believed the debate should already be settled. Supporters praised him for being direct, while critics argued that the issue was more complex than crediting one player alone. What made the moment resonate was not just what he said, but how he said it. His delivery was firm, deliberate, and unapologetic. In media culture, tone often matters as much as content, and his tone signaled conviction. Whether viewers saw it as honesty or provocation depended largely on their perspective. But one thing was undeniable: the segment instantly became a talking point, and the discussion it triggered showed no sign of fading quickly.
Two, I can't wait to work with you some more. The biggest advice I have for you is going to be how you shoot your layups, period.
Layups? Bang! What do you mean? She's our double-double queen! Bang! What they say, if it's broke, don't fix it! Bang! Teaching Angel Reese to make a layup is like teaching an old dog a new trick. It ain't gonna work! Bang! Hey, welcome to McDonald's. What can I get you? Have the Angel Reese McBang!
The most quoted portion of his commentary came when he declared that every player in the league should hope Clark stays healthy because, in his words, she's the one keeping the league afloat. He didn't phrase it as a theory or speculation. He presented it as a plain statement of fact, delivered without hesitation. That line quickly became the focal point of online discussion because of how direct it was. It wasn't softened, paraphrased, or layered with qualifiers. It was blunt, absolute, and impossible to ignore. He linked that claim directly to Reese's public remarks about possibly sitting out the 2026 season. In his framing, the idea of sitting out was presented as a strategic move intended to show leverage. But he challenged that logic by asking a pointed question: where does that leverage actually come from? His implication was that bargaining power doesn't appear out of thin air, it's generated by attention, revenue, and demand. And in his view, the surge in those areas traces back primarily to Clark's arrival and the audience growth associated with her games. That argument touches on a long-standing debate in professional sports: how much influence can a single star truly have? Historically, there have been moments when one athlete dramatically increased ticket sales, television ratings, and sponsorship interest. Supporters of his stance say Clark fits that pattern, pointing to sold-out arenas, record-breaking viewership, and unprecedented media coverage surrounding her performances. Critics respond that league growth is rarely the result of one individual, noting that marketing campaigns, rising talent across teams, and broader cultural interest all play roles. Still, the phrasing he used ensured the statement would spread. Strong wording tends to travel faster than cautious analysis, especially on social platforms where short clips dominate attention. Once the quote began circulating, it took on a life of its own. Some viewers praised him for saying what they believed others were afraid to say. Others argued that the comment minimized the contributions of dozens of players who have helped build the league over many seasons. The reaction illustrated how a single sentence can reshape a conversation. Before his remarks, discussion centered mainly on contract negotiations and player strategy. Afterward, the focus shifted to a broader question about influence and credit. That shift shows the power of framing. The way an issue is described can determine what people argue about. Whether one agrees with his conclusion or not, the impact of that statement is undeniable. It didn't just add to the conversation, it redirected it. And once a debate moves in that direction, it rarely returns to where it started.